On today's episode, we talk about how the reason we should enact policies is because everybody else is doing it. How there are no substantive differences between Jesus, Buddha, and Muhammad. How if capitalism didn't exist, we'd all be so much better off. And the creepy enjoyment some get out of seeing the state own people and their children. This is Cringe Posts. Hello, friends, and welcome to this episode of the Cringe Posts podcasts, the show where we're looking at your feed, our feed, everyone's feeds, and finding the worst possible takes online. We break them down, we laugh, we joke, we talk about why they're wrong, because you know what? Let's be honest, you don't have time to get into flame wars in the comments with all of these dumb posts, so we'll do it for you. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host Britt, and we are going to go ahead and take apart some of these really bad takes that we found in our feeds this week. But before we do that, just a reminder to comment and like and share if you're enjoying the podcast or if you like what you hear. It really helps us grow, and we want to keep that trajectory going. So we're going to go ahead and get into picking apart some bad posts, but we start always with our own bad posts from the past, because we are also prone to making bad posts. And this was evident on December 2nd of 2013 from my good co-host Britt here, when he posted, "You know you are an INTP when you go, without knowing, half the day wearing a shirt with pockets inside out." And then there's a great comment from a friend, "What a mess."
Yeah, that this was the same friend from a couple cringes ago that was like, "Oh, look at my friend Britt trying to get all the attention or whatever," and you could tell he was a good friend back then because he knew how to lovingly humble me, right, when I was looking for attention. And obviously the goal of this self-interested post was to be like, "Ooh, look at me, I'm an INTP on the Myers-Briggs and whatever," and then my buddy's just like, "Nah, you're just a mess." And I found that really helpful. So
this guy, man, I love this guy. He's so funny, and like even just hearing it in his voice, knowing who he is, it's just so funny to me. Hearing the "what a mess" from him. Man, at our university, and I don't think it was exclusive to our university by any means, but I think just around that time culturally, and then in general at universities, the Myers-Briggs test was so popular. And it's funny because taking the actual Myers-Briggs, you have to pay money for. So it's always this online version that this person created. I don't think it's actually officially Myers-Briggs that has this online free one that everyone takes for it, which just kind of makes me laugh. But everyone was obsessed with this personality test, and I hate it. I mean, like, I think there's some benefit to be gained from these kinds of tests, but what I always hated was I always would hear people say, "Oh my gosh, you did that thing, you're such a blah blah blah," or you did that because you're an ENFJ or whatever. And it's like, no, they did that thing because they are that person, and maybe that is somewhat reflected in a personality type that you can categorize. But like, I hated it because people just really ascribed, like, you're living in this box of the 16. It's like, no, they're a dynamic human, and maybe they can broadly be categorized in this way, but they didn't do something because they're in that box. I really resent that.
Yeah, it's the same thing with the Enneagram, which I guess is kind of the 2.0 version of this, or the Christian version or whatever. Because when I went back to the university to like guest lecture some classes, kids were talking about this all the time. And the thing about the Myers-Briggs, at least, like, obviously I had some interest in it apparently back in 2013, but where it's been helpful for me, at least in it, is understanding how different people communicate, right? And not necessarily like, "Ooh, I'm this," like astrology, right? For kind of nerdy people. Not as much that, but more of like, oh yeah, like this is this person's communication style, right? Like this person, if they're an S, generally they're more detail oriented than someone who's like an N, right? And they're going to be a little bit more like big ideas. And it's like, okay, when I'm communicating with this person, because I'm kind of aware that like people see the world differently than me, it helps me communicate with them better. And I saw this played out like in some workplaces after I graduated, right? Where they actually would do, like, everyone would do these, I can't remember, like some sort of assessments or whatever, but like people were aware that like, oh yeah, this person, like, because they're an accountant, right, they're going to be very detail oriented, and they're going to be very like factual. Like they don't really want to talk about theory or big picture or anything like that. And so it was useful for me, at least, like when I have to go talk to an accountant about some sort of project or something, it's like, okay, I need to speak their language, right? And they also are aware that like I'm going to be a little bit different, you know, as a person that's in marketing and sales, thinking a little bit different big picture and a little bit more theory and all that. So that's where I think it is useful. But you're like the astrology for Christians or whatever, I think is pretty cringe, and that's why I thought this was a good one to put out there.
Definitely. And I will say, like, there are tests that I do like. I think, like, for instance, the Strengths Finder test is very helpful because the quiz gets tailored to you depending on how you answer the questions. So it's not that it's a lot less of the perceived self, like how you judge your own characteristics, which I find the Myers-Briggs test was very like, how do you handle this situation? And a lot of the times when people answer those, they answer how they want to think, like, do you go with your heart or your head? And so, I go with my head because I'm that kind of person. It's like half the time those people actually act much more impulsively and irrationally than they want to admit. So I like Strengths Finder, where it asks you questions that are a little bit more abstract, and based on how you answer them, it sort of is able to highlight your specific characteristics and traits. And I find that to be very useful. So there definitely is purpose to this, but there's definitely a cult of personality of, what type are you? And like, I'm this type and I'm going to be proud of that little type. I'm going to wear it as a badge of honor. Quirky me. I went outside wearing a shirt with pockets inside out.
What was always funny to me was because I think there's 16 types, right? Yeah. Cause there's 4 letters. Yeah. And it's like, they would have stuff like, ooh, if you're this such and such a person, like only 4% of the population, you know, is this type. And it's like, there's 16 types, right? So if it's evenly distributed, like that's not that, you're not that rare, right? Like it's not that rare. But people would always like talk about that, you know, like they were some unique unicorn.
Well, and they would like highlight the characters, like historical figures who were this type or whatever. And my favorite were the fictional characters that were X type.
Yes.
No, Emperor Palpatine could not be an INTJ because Emperor Palpatine is not real. So stop it.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, unless you have any more self-bashing you want to do, some self-flagellation, we'll move to our first post here.
That wouldn't be very INTP of me to do that, so.
Okay, all right. I have to be aware of how to communicate with you then.
Yes.
On that. Okay. Our first post comes from Twitter, and it reads, as an Australian, I find it odd that Ocasio-Cortez, Omar, Presley, and Tlaib are seen as the far left when they're just fighting for things that, well, pretty much every other developed country has had for years. Just my 2 cents.
This
you can take your 2 cents and refund them because I don't particularly want your 2 cents. I love this idea that like every other country's had this thing and every other developed country's had this thing. Like, yeah, there's a reason why I like the US, why the US is exceptional. You know what a lot of other countries, you know, is pretty standard, like in Europe, is a lot of those countries don't have, like their luxury hotels don't even have air conditioning. Every other developed country can go without air conditioning in their hotels. Like, why can't the US just catch up? It's like, no, I like being exceptional. I think a lot of what the US has that makes it stand out is good. That's not a qualitative statement, just saying that other countries have said thing.
Yeah, this is such a childish argument to me. And I literally mean that because I think of, when I first saw this, I think of a child telling their mom or their parent, like, but mom, like all my friends' parents do this for their kids. It's like, well, kid, like you live with me, right? And this is how we do it. And your best interests are in my mind. I'm not saying the government is our parent. Like I want to stay clear of that. But, you know, this argument is always so cringe to me because, one, the childish aspect, and then 2, it fails to take into consideration, you know, other aspects of these countries, right? So they'll always bring up like some of the Nordic countries, you know, like Sweden or Denmark or anything like that. But then on top of that, it's like, okay, when you look at those countries on certain economic indexes, right, they've actually more free business-wise. And yeah, they've got a huge safety net, but then they also aren't, you know, supplying, you know, what was it, $737 billion was the budget for the Pentagon or whatever this year. So they're not doing that stuff. So it's like, hey, when you actually compare apples to apples, like you need to do that, right? If you're going to actually have an actual discussion comparing the U.S. to Denmark, because they're totally different, right? I'm sure, like the state of California probably has the economy as large as or larger than Denmark and Sweden combined. And a lot of the policies that these folks ask for, right, are actually driven culturally. So Nordic people generally work longer hours, they work harder, and when they actually come to the United States, they actually outperform economically their counterparts in Sweden and Denmark, right? And so that's what you really got to compare. It's like, hey, it's actually a cultural thing, right? Why these countries are doing so well. Sure, they've got a really big safety net and all that stuff, but economically they're more free and their people work way harder. And in fact, that's proven by the fact that when their people come over here, they outperform their peers back at home.
Absolutely. And I just want to add, I don't think saying as an Australian helps your case right now, because I don't know. I look at Australia and I see, people mad rushing outside their homes to the baton of the police and the riot shield, just because they want to go outside for the day. And I think, yeah, I'm glad America is exceptional. Like we obviously aren't great on COVID response unless you live somewhere like Florida or South Dakota or something, but at least we're not having swarms of police like beating down people who just want to go outside. So as an Australian, I don't care what you have to say. That's, as an American, I'll say thank you very much for this very interesting take, but you can return that back to the store. And like I don't know, again, the idea that they're fighting for things that every other developed country has for years. This argument gets used when it suits them, and then it gets flipped when they don't want it to be, when they want. So like, for instance, if like to give an example, if a state is trying to push some kind of program that other states don't have, they'll call it groundbreaking. They'll say this is a groundbreaking idea, groundbreaking problem. This is innovative, new. We have to do this. We need to move into the new world of X, Y, or Z. But then if it's something that everyone else does but we don't do, then it's, well, we need to catch up. But the reverse can never be true, right? It's not like, no one else does this, so why do we need to do this thing? It's only ever in the progress of more government intervention. There's never self-reflection on if the idea actually has merit because other people are doing it or not doing it. That's just a stupid little tagline to sell you on it.
Yeah, it reminds me, I was just Googling it because I forgot the name of it, but that Jeff Daniels scene in the newsroom where, the gal stands up, and I'm not in a big simp for like America first or anything like that necessarily, like, ooh, go America, we can do no wrong, let's go blow up people in other countries sort of deal. But, this girl stands up and she's like, hey, like, tell me why America's the greatest country. And then this guy has his monologue about, no, we're number one in incarceration and number one in obesity and blah, 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 blah. And it's interesting to me, kind of when we transition to this, you're talking about, self-flagellation for, making fun of our own cringes. But like the media and like the culture has really been pretty hard on like American exceptionalism, right? And in some ways, maybe they're justified, right? Like in terms of like our materialism and all that stuff. But they're not correct in that, like, the idea, right? The ideas that America was started on are really good, right? And they're worth pursuing again, and they're not worth throwing out, right? And that's what these folks try to do, is they try to lump in like our materialism and our unhealthiness and all these things with the original idea of America, which I still think holds pretty strong. And then they say, well, it's all bad, so we're going to just throw it out. And that's how you become, Australia or Germany right now, where you're forced to get a shot, or you go to a quarantine camp that's voluntary, but you can't leave. Yeah.
Well, it's true, because the idea that America is exceptional does not necessitate that America is perfect, right? To recognize that the U.S. has done things in a marvelous way, historically speaking, I don't think that contradicts the idea that the government sucks here and we have done awful things through that government and stuff. And like you're saying, there are qualitative problems with the US too. Somehow I don't think that our materialism usually actually gets criticized in the right way. Usually it's only as a look at the rich who are super wealthy. Now I'm going to go out on my sailboat today and, enjoy the waters. And it's like, well, okay, you don't get to be that picky if you're talking about a global index of morality and materialism here. Right. But like you think about something as simple as like slavery, where the U.S. gets absolutely hammered for the historic role that we had in slavery and shipping slaves from Africa and stuff. And yes, what the US did for that was terrible. But also you have to look at the literal hundreds and hundreds of years that the world existed, recognize that slavery was a thing that existed that predates America. The US bought into that system, and then remarkably within 200 years of its founding reversed this trend of slavery, ended it and put a stop to what was over a century over a millennia of history. That's pretty exceptional, right? And I mean, and the Great Britain as well, with William Wilberforce there leading the charge, and the slave trade ending as quickly as it did in America's history actually is pretty darn exceptional, not the reverse. And the fact is that slavery still exists in a lot of countries that are not as developed or whatever. So, you can argue, oh, every other developed country has X, Y, or Z, and you can say that that's a good thing, but there are times when the U.S. being exceptional is very specifically the reason why it is good, and very specifically the reason why it's set apart in a positive way. That's not just, pointing out that every other country has something. Again, that's not an argument. That's just, it might be evidence to back up a claim that this thing is good, but it's not very compelling evidence alone. You also have to make some qualitative arguments there. If someone tells me, look, every other kid is addicted to pornography, you should let your kid be addicted to pornography. That's not a good argument. That's just a statistic. That's a thing. Okay, pornography is very pervasive. I think it's pretty harmful. Still not gonna, expose my kid to that kind of a thing.
And that it's kind of my last thing on this one, but what you were saying reminded me of the economic argument our side usually makes is that poverty is the default status of people. So the question is not why is there poverty, the question is why is there wealth. And I think on the terms of like slavery or any of these other things, it's like, well, the default thing through basically all of history was slavery, right? And so the question is, how do you get to know slavery? And it's like, well, it looks like you can't get there unless you've got this, Western set of ideals that all men are created equal, and that we don't necessarily always live up to those precepts, but that precept is essential, right, for slavery to be done away with, because obviously for thousands of years you weren't able to do away with it until you had a society built on that foundation, and they did it within 80, 90 years of being founded, which was pretty incredible, like you were saying.
Yeah, and just to tack on, because you bring up a good point there. That idea that all men are created equal is brings us to the capitalist sort of work ethic that we have, or the Protestant work ethic as it was called in the early days, that where just because you were born poor does not mean you are inaccessible to rise the ranks. I mean, you watch or read literature, watch movie adaptations of Victorian England even, right? Which obviously has a system that is very similar in this sort of Western human rights idea, and even they look bad on new money, right? Someone whose husband or family earned their wealth, so they're still super rich, right? They're not even poor, but it's because it's new money, because it's earned. That's still looked down upon, and the fact that America, the U.S. and its founding sort of was this place where you could earn your way up to the top ranks, you could work hard, and that was what was seen as admirable and noble. That and that eventually, that idea of all men being made equal is what led to the liberation of slaves, and is what sort of informs this idea that it doesn't matter where you start. If you work hard, you can get where you want. And now, of course, this is seen as an idea of oppression to the modern progressive left. These kids don't understand that is actually the greatest liberating ideology that lets you succeed in a country, because the alternative is you are born where you're born and you don't get a say. You are born and untouchable. You will never rise through the ranks. You will never be worth the time of day to any other person in your country without this kind of idea that there is an innate human equality. And so the ability to rise through the ranks is a blessing and a liberation.
Totally agree.
Okie dokie. Next cringe here. This one comes from probably the cringiest place. I don't go on Reddit, and I feel like I need to, because Reddit is just a cesspool of cringe. So this is a Reddit comment Well, I think it's actually from Twitter, someone posting a Reddit comment because, I guess this user also didn't want to have to wear a hazmat suit to go into Reddit. But this Reddit post reads, I want to see videos of anti-vax parents being painfully restrained, the look of absolute horror in their eyes, tears running down their cheeks as their children are forcibly vaccinated against the will of their racist, Trumpist, anti-vax, transphobic parents. I want them all to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are powerless in the face of the vaccine. This reads like a parody to me, almost. It's sickening.
Yeah, so with the I remember during the federal, like when Biden did the press conference saying, "Hey, we're going to federally mandate vaccines for everyone over 100 employees." I remember reading through Reddit comments because I initially saw the articles posted on there, and it terrified me, man, just to see how these people. There were a lot of comments very similar to this. And it just shows and reveals that these folks, it's not about your safety. It's not about your health. It's not about keeping your neighbor safe. It really is just about punishing people of another ideology, right? They're like, well, if 80% of Trump voters are not, or they're anti or vaccine resistant or whatever, we're going to hurt them. And we're excited about it. And this is great. And that's what's so... I think such a red pill for people, for one, and then so also terrifying, right? To be like, man, we can. You never want anyone like this within the a couple feet of the reins of power, right? Like they need to be far away from it. Unfortunately, I think like with the New York mandate, at least right now, it's like they're pretty close to it. They're not. They're if not already in seats of power.
I mean. Again, I don't have any way. I mean, this name is already blurred out from the original post we snagged it from, so I can't even verify this user. This reads to me like someone who's incredibly young and naive, and maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm hard pressed to think that this kind of grotesque, vulgar language, really, that's so extensive and wanting to see the painfully restrained force. This has to be someone who's just so desensitized to anything in this life that saying these kinds of things is their hyperbole because they're immature. Then again, the internet has emotionally and stunted a lot of people's maturity and growth. So this could be someone who's not a kid, I suppose. But it makes me think about how these people really do see citizens and citizens' children and all that as property of the state, and that the state first and foremost has a right to you and your body. And this just strikes me again as all the language that I think people have used at either independent or conservative voices, that government is the religion of the left, is just more and more becoming accurate and true. Because at this point, there is no doubt that they view, again, you do not own yourself, the government owns you. You do not own your children, the government owns you. And then of course the post, it dissolves into vaccinated against the will of their racist, Trumpist, anti-vax, transphobic parents. Like all these unrelated things to anything with a vaccine. Like you and I did not support Trump, and we are against vaccination mandates. I'm not against all vaccinations, but you have to call me a racist, which has nothing to do with this. You have to call me a Trumpist. You have to call me anti-vax, and you have to call me transphobic. None of those things, except for anti-vax, which is not even accurate, have anything to do with the scenario they bring up. It's just like lobbying every word they can because Nazi has lost its luster with its overuse in the last few years.
Yeah, this reminded me of, I don't know if you saw this article going around, but basically I can't remember which state it was. I think it was actually New York, but they were offering free pizza to kids at the school, like the teachers and stuff and nurses, to say, hey, we'll give you free pizza if you get the vaccine, but don't tell your parents. And it's like, oh my gosh, at that point, it's like, pull your kid out of that school, get out of that city, get out of that state, and go homeschool somewhere, in the sticks, because that's just crazy, man. And I think that might be one of the silver linings of this whole deal, with the election in Virginia, and then parents seeing what these teachers and stuff are saying on camera. I mean, we had that incident here in Washington State, right, where the kid was saying, well, I think Trump's a hero, and then the teacher kind of reprimanded him. And so I think that's a silver lining, right? So the more these people show themselves, the more the average American who doesn't pay attention to politics but is just kind of a decent person that like doesn't really have one viewpoint or another, but it's just like, I just want to live and have my children grow up happy and all that stuff. The more these people show themselves, the more those people are going, the decent people are going to come over to the good side, and face down this evil, because I really think this is evil. You know, it's hard to say that this person isn't evil. It's hard to say that, you know, de Blasio in New York, what he's doing over there isn't evil. I think it's incredibly scary, and hopefully courageous people rise to meet it.
I hope so. It's interesting because this general sentiment really is on the rise. I mean, it's anecdotal evidence, so take it with a grain of salt, but just so many people I talked to who were very open to and just kind of assuming they would send their kids to public school growing up are now thinking like public school is not really an option anymore. Like it's going to be homeschool or private school, and I'm going to have to figure that out. Even very moderate people like, you know, like you're talking about. And what's funny is I don't know the exact court case, but I was just hearing, I sung the praises of Alito, who's not exactly my favorite Supreme Court justice. He's pretty terrible on a lot of things, but he also was bringing up critical race theory in a court case recently, and he said, you know, you guys have these restrictions on religious teachings in schools, and yet you're teaching something like critical race theory, which really has all of the attributes of a religion as a worldview and an ideology itself. So what's the difference? Like, why is this allowed when religious, you know, worldviews are not? And to me, it's like it's a disappointing that it takes all the way to critical race theory for that point to get across. But I'm very glad that that's coming into the mainstream, because someone like you or I have recognized that for a long time there is no objective. There's no objective way to teach someone just facts. Like, there will be a bias, and the religion of the state is what most kids are being taught in a state-run school. What else is there? A Christian school is going to teach a Christian education. Government school is going to teach a government education. Now I think critical race theory specifically is waking these people up. But I hope these kinds of people who are making these posts online, I really do hope they overplay their hand, because to see something as wild as this, I think would make any parent balk, regardless of their actual status on, you know, opinion of vaccines or even vaccine mandates. This kind of gross, like, grab of power and hunger to see punishment and suffering of people it's not a good look.
It's not.
Okay, unless you have anything else, we'll move on to the next post. Oh, and this one is some, like, I don't know, Gen X / Boomer poster energy. I love it. I do love it. The post reads, "Confuse not the teacher with the teaching," with a picture of a sign that says, "Buddha was not a Buddhist. Jesus was not a Christian. Muhammad was not a Muslim. They were teachers who taught love. Love was their religion." I want to get my friends on the John 3:15 podcast to talk
I know.
about that.
I was thinking of them.
This is, I mean, man, that's really deep, dude. Did you ever consider that Jesus was not a Christian because Christians follow Jesus, and Jesus set a very specific guideline of the way to heaven and the path because he was God? Like, yeah, technically speaking, Jesus wasn't a Christian, but that's like, I mean, that would be like saying, I don't know, like, I don't listen to my own podcast, right? Because I'm recording it and speaking it. I'm not a listener to my own show because I'm creating the show.
Yeah, what got me was like, it's like day one of Christianity is learning that, oh, Christian means little Christ, right? Like, I am a miniature version of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, so that's like, this person has never read a single line of scripture ever in their life, apparently, because that literally the religion of Christianity is, how do I die to myself, and become more like Jesus? And I can't necessarily speak too much to, you know, Buddhism or Islam or anything like that. But I know for a fact, like, for Christians, like, that's the core of the religion, is we are becoming like Jesus. And so Jesus, I guess, is, if Jesus is 100% of Jesus, and we're trying to get there, it's kind of hard to say that he wasn't a Christian, right? Because that's the definition is within the name.
Right. Yeah, it's really stupid. It's one of those things where you see it listed out this way and you're like, whoa, maybe there's something to this. Or you're taking it back. Like, I mean, I guess that's true. Like, neither of these three were in there, but again, that's really a meaningless metric in any reasonable regard. Like, Luther was not a Lutheran. Well, yeah, because that wasn't a thing. Like, the people who followed his teachings were Lutherans. Like, anyone who follows any kind of leader who sets some or principles that were set up in some way, shape, or form, they embody that very person. That and then to just boil it down, like Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, they just taught love. Love was their religion. Like, that's stupid.
Gosh.
First of all, not even literally or technically true. I think Muhammad actually would have called himself a Christian at first. Right, because they argue that they're of that same faith, maybe a Jew of some kind, and then he branches off into his own thing. Jesus considered himself a Jew; he was king of the Jews, right? So no, love wasn't their religion. They actually already did hold religions, and then they said that they were, each of them respectively said that they were coming to bring something new. And of course, you and I would say that Jesus was the only one legitimately doing so and bringing anything salvific anyway. But it's just so dumb to say love was their religion. Like, if love was the religion of these people, then there would be no specific doctrinal differences that make these distinct teachings. It's not like they're all saying the same thing in different ways. They're saying very different things. Jesus alone is saying, I am the way, the truth, and life. No one gets to the Father except through me. That right there is an exclusionary statement. So if Muhammad does not say you are going to Christ or to God through Christ alone, and if Buddha says you can only find enlightenment by finding eternal salvation through Christ alone, if they are not specifically saying that, they are distinctly different. End of discussion. Period.
Yeah, that's people always. I think it was Lee Strobel had the argument that, like, you kind of got to categorize Jesus as one of two things: either he's a liar or he's Lord, right? And because he does say that exclusionary statement, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And if he's saying that, he either is God or he's a liar, and you got to choose one of the two. And if he's a liar, you probably shouldn't have him up on your poster of, love is this guy. This guy's teaching love or whatever. This just reeks to me of someone that wants to do what they want, right? They say, well, all of these different religions, they're really just teaching love, and I'm the one who gets to define what love is, and this means that I get to do this or do that, and I don't have to do this or don't have to do that. And it's just a way for them to kind of justify themselves in whatever way they want. And that's what makes it really dangerous in a lot of ways, because people get self-deluded, right? If you don't have someone outside of you that holds you to a better standard, you don't have a standard above yourself, then you are truly lost, and you are truly, you are stranded in the middle of an ocean of whatever you want and your desires, and that is a very scary place to be. It usually doesn't lead to good things.
That's a really good point, right? Like, even the definition of love from each of these three people would be different, right? And being able to say they just taught love, then you make yourself God in that sense. You're setting the parameters and definition. Well, confrontation is hard, so loving this person means not telling them that their lifestyle is actually going to harm them or create problems, or, well, I don't really care about that personally. So loving them is just accepting that it's different, without actually doing any of the hard work. But the way Jesus loved was definitely different than the way Buddha or Muhammad loved as well. So it's just wholly inadequate, and like you said, it's just kind of a cop out, cheap way to do what you want to keep doing and not have to make hard calls, I guess.
Agree with you there.
All right, and lastly, we have one more post from Twitter that reads, if capitalism didn't already exist and somebody suggested we all work under a guy for 40 hours a week while they make all the money and decisions, we'd beat the crap out of him. I just love, if capitalism didn't already exist, you probably would not be able to tweet what you just tweeted right now, because Twitter wouldn't exist, because the internet
and
wouldn't
exist. You'd be working
exist.
more than 40 hours. You'd be working more than 40 hours, and you'd probably be a slave. Like, that's just how things go without capitalism.
Right. Well, and while they make all the money and decisions, it's like, well, okay, but for one, they don't make all the money, but two, even if they did, it's because they have what's at risk, right? They make the wrong decision and they lose everything, and you don't. Everything that they have tied up is dependent on this succeeding, and if it doesn't succeed for you, you have you lose a job, which sucks, but you don't lose all the capital you've put in and essentially what you've risked in this. There's no risk for you in the same way there is for them. So yeah, they get to make the decisions because they have all the risk, and that's why they get the profits when profits come in, and those get shared with people as well, right? A more productive economy is just a benefit in and of itself, regardless of raises and things like that.
Yeah, and this is kind of an age-old classic, right, for us to kind of go after in terms of these folks don't have any concept of reality, right? Like they've never taken any class or done any reading or education or worked a job or tried to run a business that helps them understand how just basic accounting and variable pricing and things like that work. And it makes me think of another tweet, and we should have done this one because it would have been good. But someone tweeted out, some famous person, I can't remember, blue check mark, and they were like, oh, like $15 million salary for the CEO at Starbucks, like that could have gone a long way to help these folks, and blah, 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 blah. And then Gene Epstein, who I know you and I both really like, was like, hey, like if you spread that $15 million out among the 300,000 workers that they've got, that equates to about $42 total of additional compensation, or about less than a quarter of a cent per hour increase, right, for the hours that they work. And so people don't realize, because they see these big numbers, right, because that's the beauty of capitalism, is that goods that would have been luxuries 100 years ago are now manufactured at scale in such a way that you can grab them for, $5, right? You can grab a coffee that was from a bean halfway across the world with milk that was sourced from, down in California, with a barista that knows how to make it from a machine that was put together with all these different parts, and you only have to pay $5 for it. Like, that's pretty amazing that can happen, right? And people don't realize that the margins on that are so small because to make it affordable, it has to be done at scale, right? And so you've got 300,000 employees. It's not like if you want to give all of those employees another $3 more an hour or whatever, it's not like, oh yeah, the latte becomes 25 cents more expensive. The latte doesn't exist anymore, right? Because they can't actually provide that service at scale at that price. And that's where like all these different things start to screw things up, like when you've got the minimum wage and you've got government trying to, set floors and ceilings, because reality eventually has to set in. Economics is just as much a science with inputs and outputs as, physics, right? If you do one thing, something else is going to happen, and there's a balance that needs to be struck. And when you artificially enforce different things, like you make that equation not able to happen and people aren't able to sort it out. It's just so funny. It's like, what, do you think that the cavemen, or not even cavemen, you think the medieval peasants back in, 1400 were like, oh man, like 40 hours a week? No way. No, they were like, gosh darn it, I am going to work as many hours as I have to get food, because unless I do the work, food doesn't exist, right? Because there's no scalability of it, right? You had to do all of the plowing, you had to do all of the planting, you had to do all of the harvesting. And now we have all these things that come together so that people specialize, right? And people can work 40 hours a week. And as things get better and better, maybe we will work 30 hours or 15 hours a week or whatever. But the reality is we've never had it better in history than we have it right now. And to think that 40 hours is like some travesty for people to work per week is just crazy. It's just a crazy idea.
Yeah. Well, and just for the record, that tweet you're thinking of was none other than good old Bernie Sanders. So
okay,
no surprise there that he was the one who was the blue check mark, because his takes are terrible always, pretty much. So the thing that I think is interesting about this particular post, and it's highlighted in this, but it's a fundamental problem that a lot of these kinds of claims have, is if capitalism didn't already exist, right there, they're making a base assumption that if capitalism didn't already exist, they're living in the exact status quo we have now in terms of material wealth and comfort. And that is the problem. In the same way that the statists on the right, usually, sometimes the left too, will say, without government, who will build the roads? They fail to think of the potential of what can be, and try to think about alternative to what is. The problem is that these people don't think of what would be, in a different reality without this capitalist structure that we built. And so the problem is, you take your presuppositions of what we have now, and then you either apply and say this is exactly how it would be without bad thing I don't want, or you say with good thing I like. Without that, it would just be terrible and awful, and there's no possible way for this to exist without said thing. So it's like, no, you actually have to You actually have to think through those things and look at historic trends and look at, the rate of wealth in this country relative to when more free market policies and things are put in place, and just the global wealth index once free trade has taken over in major countries, and seen how that has affected global poverty, global hunger, global standard of living, and then specifically within the United States as well, all those kinds of things. So you have to not only just focus on assuming that you would be coming from the same place you are now, because it would be fundamentally different. And you could argue that it would be fundamentally better, but the burden's on you to prove that. You can't just make the assumption that it is the same or better as it is now. And the reason we have 40 hours a week and all, and someone makes all the decisions and stuff, is this arbitrary thing that has literally no impact on where we've been, because that's just not true. And that's what's frustrating, right? Because again, it lacks a real substantive argument. And I'm not saying that Twitter's the best place to make those, but at least make a Twitter thread with your reasoning of why necessarily without this you would be in a better place or the same. But until you do that, you can't just operate off the spot that you're in now. It's like, I don't know, it'd be like making a cake and then making it with all the sugar and all the flour and all the sweets and all the frosting on it, eating it and enjoying how sweet it is, and you're like, man, if carbs and sugar didn't already exist, and someone suggested that we take this cake and then we just add all these sugars and we just add all of these fats and unhealthy carbs into it, and then you get really fat from all that, we would beat them up. It's like, okay, but without all those things, you wouldn't be eating the cake in the first place because it would be disgusting, You can't take out fundamental building blocks and assume things will be what they are without those things and then say, we just need to get rid of the things we don't like.
Yeah, it's this is an example on Tim Pool's show that I hear him give all the time, but he talks about, he's like, yeah, I've got friends, and I've had friends, not to this degree, but almost close, where they're like, well, like, what do you mean if we stop supply chains that we won't have groceries? Like, we just go to the grocery store for food. Like, that's where we get food. It's just there. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, and I'm not saying that I have friends that are that stupid, because that's pretty bad, but I have friends that like don't get that, like, oh yeah, you shut down that meat factory for 3 months over on the other side of the country, you're not going to have any meat over here. Like, it's just not going to happen. If you don't, as Elon Musk put it, if you don't make stuff, you don't have stuff, right? And these folks don't get that, like, yeah, the status quo that they've grown up with, all these things that they take for granted, drywall and heating and air conditioning and running water and plumbing and all this stuff. It's like, for basically 99.9% of human history has not existed, and we were fortunate enough to be born in the sliver of 100 years that it does. And so you might want to ask yourself, why do we have those things now? And that's the question none of these folks do. It's like G.K. Chesterton's fence kind of idea that, like, hey, if you stumble upon a fence in the middle of nowhere, before you tear it down, maybe you should understand why it was there in the first place, right? Like, why someone built it there in the first place. It's like, okay, we've got all these different mechanisms in capitalism, and yeah, there's things that can be improved that are self-evident, right? And there's principles that we could see are wrong with it. But, like, maybe you should ask yourself, the world works the way it does. The latte costs how much it does for a reason. And before you go about trying to, like, mandate your will upon the world before you've done anything, you should ask yourself that question first. And then once you know the answer and you can explain it, then you can start trying to change it. But until you understand the question, or you understand, like, why these things are happening the way they are and what led to them and what was put behind them, you probably should just shut up, because you're just stupid. Literally, the definition of stupid.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's not universally true. Like, there's a lot of people who don't do the work, who agree with my positions, who don't do the work and, like, for the things they want to change, doing that research. But by and large, I find that the majority of people who who are of sort of liberty-minded in self responsibility, individual philosophies, those kinds of values, they often have done this kind of work because so much of the core of what you and I believe is the individual being responsible for yourself and your family, not relying on government. And so it's like, when you say these things, you're like, well, do I want the government doing this for me? And then you kind of do the work of researching and figuring out, like, you know what? No, I'm looking at the history of, President FDR, knowing about the Pearl Harbor attack, baiting Japan into attacking to get us into a war he knew was unpopular, and then lying to the masses about it. And you're like, you know what? Maybe that's not the kind of foreign policy that I want, that I do want to tear down. I do want this institution to be, because it's built on a house of lies. So it's like, okay, I can tear that institution down. And then this person just like, well, if capitalism didn't already exist and we put in the things that I don't like about it, we wouldn't want that. And it's like, well, do you know why it's a 40-hour workday? Because that's actually a lot of relief for you, and they don't actually have the understanding. It's always just like, because rich person told us to, and they control everything. It's like, might want to do your research there.
I don't have any more on this one.
Okie dokie.
That was good.
Sounds good. We will wrap this episode up then. Thank you so much for staying with us another episode. We always want to encourage you to comment, like, share, leave a review, all that good stuff. We really appreciate it when you do, because it helps us out a ton. And we will see you on the next one. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.